Right. So once again, colleagues, good evening to all of you. I welcome you to our third lecture session in AUI 4862 in the 2025 academic year. Right. So in the previous lecture session that we held, I took you guys through one of the past question papers rather for 2018. And the essence for that obviously was to illustrate practically the application of ethical leadership. Right. And then I did point it out, obviously, that we were also going to look into one of the previous assignment questions, which was, of course, assignment 3 for the previous academic year. But however, to ensure that you are capacitated to answer or to respond to that assignment question, there was need, of course, for me to also ensure that I take you through chapter number 5 in your internal audit perspective textbook. So there's need for us to do that. And just to ensure that we are on the same page, I just want to quickly reflect back to where we are in terms of your concept discussion. So we are still busy with topic 1, surrounding the notion of corporate governance and ethics in different organizational environments. So what I'm really touching on quite currently, on topic 1, it's of course pertinent to ethics in different organizational environments. So there's an element of ethical leadership which I tapped from in the audit notes. And I explained the 6 important principles thereof, which is, of course, what we discussed also practically from that October-November 2018 question paper. But over and above that, in the prescribed textbook, just a moment, colleagues, I just need to put my laptop on the charger. So in the prescribed textbook, which is your internal audit perspective textbook, they deal in a greater detail to this subject of organizational ethics. So that's what I want to ensure that I cover with you guys tonight to ensure that we can then, of course, embark on the assignment 3 discussion for the previous academic year. So without any further ado, just to give an outline of what you're going to uncover in that chapter, they introduce you, of course, to the importance of organizational ethics in different business environments. They also explain to you what I call or rather what they regard as the ethical management process, which is, of course, in this instance denoted by section 5.33 of this textbook, right? That ethics management process gives you different steps which the board and management can actually perform in order to establish an ethical code of conduct, right? But of course, for that to be possible, there is need for them to have an ethical culture in place. That ethical culture, it's not just built up by simply following the ethics management process, but it's important for those in charge of directing the affairs of the organization, which is of course the board, to lead by example. And leading by example, that is what is denoted as leadership commitment. So leadership commitment, it also implies that as far as ethics, organizational ethics is concerned, it is a subject of discussion even during annual board meetings, which the company would host annually. And leadership commitment also imply that everybody that is expected to comply with ethical code that is in place is fully compliant, involving even those that would have actually formulated the code of ethics itself. So in other words, there's no pre-exclusion to say the code of ethics is supposed to be only followed by junior employees and management. But the ethical code of conduct is one that should be observed and followed, of course, by both internal and external parties. From the internal side of it, we are also including the board of directors. right? And then, of course, governance structures, it's another aspect that we will touch. So obviously, from the governance structure, we know for a fact that it would describe the flow of authority within the organizational structures. Of course, at the top, or rather at the highest point of authority, you have the governing body or the governing structure, which is the board of directors. And then, of course, the flow of authority then goes to management, from management, and then you have their subordinates, which of course can also involve, line managers and the likes of, your junior employees within the structures. Very, very important. And then, of course, we get to the ethics management process itself. So there are several steps concerning the ethics management process that you need to be aware of. I'm going to discuss about them with you guys as we move along. And in the ethics management process, just to give an overview, you discover that they'll describe different forms of ethics. We call it ethics management style, right? So there are different ethics management style um, that organizations can apply, right? And it also helps also to measure the level, or rather the effectiveness of the ethics management style in place. So we're going to discuss that, of course, as we flow through the ethics management process. Then 5.3.4, it's independent assessment and reporting. So the independent assessment, this is where internal auditors or other assurance service providers, play their part as well, to enhance, of course, the ethics, the ethical values of the organization, right? And reporting as element, it's really part of the integrated report, which the board is expected to also report on ethical issues in the organization and how they, of course, dealt with them. But not only that, and also they need to have like a scenario analysis where, they would describe a potential incident that can have an ethical impact on the organization, and then they need to also have a prescription of how they intend, or rather a blueprint on how they intend to tackle and such issues supposedly if it happens in the future. So those kind of aspects should be discussed in the ethics management report, which forms part of the integrated report of the organization. So that's what you would see when you get to section 5.3.4. All right, so 5.4, assessing organizational ethics and culture, and internal audit perspective. So this is, of course, describing now how the internal audit would perform the audit over the ethical matters of the organization. And also, of course, the same would apply with external auditors. But with the external auditors, it's really more related to the financial statements. So obviously, yes, there's consideration about the integrity of management, which the external auditors would look into, especially if they have to make a decision whether or not to accept a client, an audit client, as it were. Right. So those are some of the things that you'd see when you get into those sections. So colleagues, what I just did right now was to give you guys an overview of what is important and, of course, what you can expect as we go through that. Right. So without any further ado, let me go straight to explain some important things here. So I would start with section 5.2. There's a reason why. Right. So what you'd see here, they will just explain, of course, that look, when you're building an ethical culture, you need to do that by giving consideration of the recommendations of King 4 on that subject matter, which is, of course, principle 2 of the code. So what you discover is in the King 4 report, they also describe what ethics is all about, what organizational ethics is all about. So when you talk of, okay, so I'm going to be putting some footnotes here as I describe on this matter. So when you talk of organizational ethics, colleagues, right, One important aspect is to note pertaining to that is the fact that it involves ethical practices, ethical practices that are approved of the board. It involves ethical practices that are approved of the board. Intend to build an ethical culture within the organization. Now, for them to get to that, or rather for them to achieve this, there's need, of course, for them to have, if you may allow me here, I just want to change this. Right. So there's need for them to have specified principles to be observed by everybody. And when I'm saying by everybody, I'm referring to both internal and external parties, or rather, yeah, external. Let me just call it parties for now. Okay, but I'm really trying to cover as many role players that interact, of course, with the organization. So I'm talking about when I'm referring to external parties here, I'm referring to the likes of suppliers of the organization. I'm talking about the likes of consumers or customers which buy or interact with the organization, maybe by virtue of requesting for a service from them, or rather by buying certain products from the organization in question. So specified principles to be observed. It's part and parcel of organizational ethics, according to the King 4 report, not only limiting it to that, but norms, you know. Let me just put it as behavioral norms. Okay. So with the norms, it has to do with behaviors that are approved within the ethical environment of the organization. So meaning to say there are such behaviors that are not really approved within an ethical environment of an organization. So for instance, when they give you rules of conduct, all right, within the ethical environment, or rather within the work environment, to say, look, guys, you need to address each other professionally. Even in the issue about the dress code and all of that, and that, for instance, it's not allowed to exercise substance abuse in the work environment, those kind of things. Those are like typical behavioral norms that should be observed or that should be practiced by the employees in the organization in order for that organizational ethical culture to be one that adds value to at the end of the day towards the agenda of the company. Now, not only that, but even standards. All right, standards of performance and practice. Okay, let me just accept somebody here. So I'm just trying to give you a little bit of light with regards to this. All right. So other than just, of course, reading a statement as it is from the textbook, right? So I'm just trying to make sure that I pinpoint and then I expound further on what is given there, right? So organizational ethics is defined by the fourth King 4 report on corporate governance as the ethical values, which is in this case involvement of principles, norms, standards, and guidelines. So standards, obviously, they are standards which apply across the different or various units within an organization. Then there are those standards which can only be pertinent to the department or to a specific unit, business unit within the organization. But in this case, the one that we are really covering is more of a holistic point of view, meaning to say that it encompasses everybody within the organization, right? And then guidelines. So now, the guidelines should be clear and understandable. When I'm saying that they should be clear and understandable, I'm talking about clearly communicated for all to be aware about how certain things are supposed to be done. That is why the use of procedure manuals comes into play. And that is also one of the reasons why policies are drafted, right? And of course, with the policy document, usually it can also be disseminated in the contract of employment, which the employer signs with the employer, which the employee signs with the employer, right? But of course, you can also have like a typical policy document that one can get as a printout and clearly disseminating how things are supposed to be done in that environment. Or, excuse me, all of this would build up what we call organizational ethics. I hope I'm making sense to you, colleagues. Now, one could then ask a question to say, why is it important for companies or for business entities or organizations, for that matter, right? Other than just looking at profit organizations, profit motivated organizations. Why is it important for them to have organizational ethics? Because remember, just let me add this. This organizational ethics, it's applicable to both profit organizations and non-profit organizations. I'm also trying to show you how I make notes even if I'm doing my individual studies. So like non-profit organizations. So when you talk of this organizational ethics issue, it's not an subject that is only confined to a specific group of individuals or to a certain group of entities, but it's applicable to both profit organizations and non-profit organizations. There is need for them to have an ethical culture that is followed there. Otherwise, if there is no ethical culture, or rather there's no any form of organizational ethics in place, there's likelihood of failing to achieve your mandate as an entity. In a mandate, I'm referring to failing to achieve your mission, failing to achieve the vision for that organization. So organizational ethics plays a very pivotal role in ensuring the achievement of the mission of the entity, ensuring the achievement of the vision of that organization at the end of the day. Why? Because it is about building a positive corporate image. Now, to build that positive corporate image, you need to be in good standing with society at large. That's very important. And when we're talking about society, we are really referring to several people. So you need to be in good standing with society at large. You need to observe or positively contribute towards environmental there's a word that they use. It's what I don't. It's okay. There's this word that I'm looking for, guys. Sorry about this. It's when you want to preserve something. You know, I wouldn't want to say environmental preservation. But it's more or less something like that. But there's a word which starts. It's man, convention. What conversation? When you want to conserve something.
Conservation, I
Conservation,
think.
exactly. Hey, this cool guys. Hey. Right. or when you want to conserve, yes, conservation, environmental conservation. So it's obviously one of those things. So there are three things really that can impact a corporate image of the company, and which is really something that is addressed, of course, through organizational ethics at the end of the day. So one aspect I've already touched is it has to do with society. The second aspect, it has to do with the environment. And then the last aspect, it has to do with what? Maximizing shareholders wealth. So I'm just going to put some words here so that you can be able to see how these things blend. So that's profit, or what we can also regard as economy. So I would call this economic performance. The second bullet part, or bullet point in this case, this is really referring to environmental performance. Your environmental performance as a company, it matters because it can either positively contribute to your to a good public image or public standing, or it can negatively affect your corporate image at the end of the day. Now, and then the first one, of course, is just society. Now, whilst I'm on this aspect about society, it's one of, I mean, all of them rather. Yeah, let me just put it separately. There's something I want to state here. So building a corporate image, it also brings into to note the importance of the social and ethics committee of the organization. Remember, this is one of the board committees according to the King 4 report. So what am I explaining to you guys? I'm explaining to you, I'm trying to really portray the importance of having organizational ethics in the organization. So it is to ensure that the public image of the organization is protected and improved, actually, because you want to be in the good books with the people, with the society. Why is it important to be in the good books with the society at large? It's because they are the ones that either part of your customers, or they are the ones who are really even part of your suppliers, your supply chain, and so on, right? So it's very important to be in the good books with society. And one of the board committees that help us as an entity to achieve that is the social and ethics committee. But not only limiting it to society, you need to be contributing positively to the planet. That is the environment where you are operating. Otherwise, if you are violating environmental laws, whereby all you think about, or rather what you prioritize as an organization, is maximizing shareholders' wealth at the expense of degrading the environmental status, it will come back to haunt your corporate image at the end of the day. That's why, for instance, things like protests can begin to take place, or even the government actually having to take some corrective measures, which can, at the end of the day, either end up taking you out of business, because you are not doing things that are contributing positively to the environmental well-being, right? So that is another important aspect. And of course, for as long as it's a profit entity, profit organization, their motive at the end of the day is to ensure that they maximize profitability, or what we call shareholders' wealth, right? I hope these things are making sense, colleagues.
Still clear.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I think we can move on. So I was just trying to summarize what is happening here, right? So now I want to jump to some other important aspects, right? So colleagues, there's something called an ethics management framework. So there's a diagram or a figure which you will see below. I'm going to show it to you just now. So there's something called the ethics management framework. So in the ethics management framework, it speaks of different, I would call these ones pillars. All right. I would call these ones pillars of the ethics management framework. All right. Building pillars of the ethics management framework. Now, in other words, if you want to have a proper organizational ethics environment, you need to have all those pillars in place, or rather, you need to follow some of those pillars at the end of the day. So, of course, as clearly depicted, colleagues, you need to have leadership commitment within the structures that are in place, especially from the leaders, those that are rather those that are charged with the responsibility to lead and to direct the affairs of the organization. They need to be actively involved. They have to have a buy-in to the ethical values of the organization in question. And then, of course, we need to have an effective governance structures in place. And then, of course, they need to have a formal ethics management process, which is being followed to formulate, establish your ethical codes and ethical policies, And then lastly, there's need to ensure that we have an independent opinion, right? And that's where the independent assessment and reporting aspect comes in. So the ethics, let me just say, organizational ethics of an organization should be audited. The purpose for that is because with audits of this aspect about an organization, it helps them, to identify areas where they may not have been contributing positively, maybe as a result of the way they are conducting their business. So maybe it can be that, of course, at the end of the day, is the three things that I've pointed out: society, environment, and then the economic performance of the organization. Those are the three important aspects of note that you would discover, or rather that you would see when you're looking at an integrated report. Trust me, colleagues, the essence of an integrated report is to integrate reports pertinent to these three areas I've pointed out. How the company has interacted with society. How has the company performed from its interaction with where the company is operating. That's the environment or the planet. And also how they've performed financially in terms of intending, or economically in terms of pursuit of generating profitability or profits at the end of the day, especially if it's a profit organization. So that's where those financial statements, the audit reports, and all that come into the pictures. I'm just trying to give you typical examples. Say when you are talking about these three things, okay, what kind of reports would we expect or would we see as we look into those three important areas? So obviously, for instance, if I'm just to explain the profitability side, the most obvious one, they will be reporting, for instance, on the annual financial statements, which will be reflecting historic performance. So for instance, if a company is reporting on the 2024 financial year, they'll also put other previous, I wanted to say academic years, but previous financial years as performance as well. Why is it the case? It's because it helps those that are reviewing the company's performance, especially financial performance. It helps them to assess how the company is performing. Is it improving from the previous performance, or are they perhaps even going down the drain? In other words, they are underperforming. So if I have comparative figures as an investor, for instance, as shareholder, potential investor to the company, and I look into that detail where I have, current performance, which is maybe the 2024 financial year, then I've got 2023 financial year, and maybe another year also, 2022 in place. If I have all these figures, and maybe I'm looking at a statement of profit or a loss and other comprehensive income, and I'm just assessing how their revenue stream, or rather how their revenue performance has been looking like. It might be something that I might be interested to evaluate, or maybe it might be even about the net profits of the company at the end of the day. Why? Because I want to assess whether this company will be able to issue or distribute dividends if I invest in it. So if I have comparative figures as an investor, it gives me a better basis for the decision that I can make pertinent to that organization. Am I making sense, colleagues?
Yes, brief.
Yeah. So, and also, of course, any other, so yeah, even the ratio analysis and all that stuff, it really becomes, it's part and parcel, anything to do with the financial performance of the company. Of course, that is, economic performance. And then anything to do with this societal related matters like your corporate social investment reports, or your corporate social investments, stuff like that. It's of course within the environment of societal performance. Why? Because we want to also know how is the company contributing to society. So when you're talking of society, it's not just addressing external personalities, but it also involves even the employees themselves. How is the company enhancing the welfare of its internal employees? Are they improving their skill set? In other words, are they improving the what I would call employment capability? Employee capabilities, sorry, not employment, but employees' capabilities. Are they doing something to improve the capabilities of their workforce, or workforce capability rather, right? So that can be seen when we see, for instance, they sponsor studies of their employees. When we see that employees are being taken for training workshops, maybe once every quarter, stuff like that. So those things that you guys are encountering, in your normal working environments, where you have to go for workshops and stuff like that, or where you have to be trained over a particular subject matter, it's really also a way of contributing to societal societal contributions of the company. So yes, at the end of the day, is to benefit the company in terms of how their output would be at the end of the day, but at the same time, it's improving you as an individual employee in the company, because at the end of the day, you are at a better place after they've taken you through those training inductions or those workshops than you were before you actually maybe embarked on the journey to be an employee of that entity. Or over and above that, even when they send, like when they sponsor, for instance, your academic studies, it's also part of improving or enhancing the welfare of their employees, and it's really part of societal initiatives. Right. Now, those things would need to be actually reported in the integrated report. So that would be the interest of employees now. So when the company publishes the integrated report, employees would be keenly interested to know, okay, so how is this company intending to contribute towards my career? How is this company intending to protect my employment? What are the initiatives that they have as far as that aspect is concerned? Social and Ethics Committee would help to answer that of course, for the employees, Right. So colleagues, we're left with a minute, and in the next 2 minutes, we would join so that we can discuss part B of this engagement. Thank you, guys.